So because they put all their eggs in one basket above the ground and there wasn't effectively any seed at that time of the fires coming through, and there's no seed bank other than the lack of these things, we had a local extinction event. And so for Burrowa pine, despite lots of looking in the known locations where it used to occur, there was no seedling recruitment at all, basically because there was no fertile cones ready at that time. Brings us to today, and so this is the earliest sowings that Wendy did for us with the earliest seed from coral bank. So this is only coral bank seed, but our aim is, as Laura said, to have a diverse, resilient, genetically strong population. So this today, we're the litmus test. We're doing the pioneering early phase plantings to see how it works, to see how much we can stack on Kathy's shoulders to bring down, how easy is it to do, what's the practicalities, because we've only got 70 plants this time around. The aim is to get this to be a viable population with mixed genetics to have 500 plants. So we're going to learn this time around how this site goes compared to tomorrow.
The aim will be, can we put back plants into Burrowa pine that have got appropriate genetics, but also appropriate resilience and diversity of their genetics, and where we postulated the potential to handle future events, whether it be fire, whether it be pollinator concerns or whatever, have we got some resilience? Well, the canei story in our part of the world, in northeast Victoria, linked to Kelton Goyne, our ranger based in Tallangatta, so a Parks Victoria ranger, who was always sort of nagging at me in terms of concerns that he had over canei in Burrowa Pine National Park.
I think I pointed out to you years ago, probably in 2016-17, that I noticed that there's pictures there, but there's larger, only grows a couple of metres tall, this species, but there was no recruitment, no young ones coming up.
Is that the feeling that an intense fire like that really hot one will wipe them out? And
It shouldn't with Banksia. I'm not a Royal Botanical Gardens. Banksia should thrive on that, and has in other areas. But the situation we had was that, well, it's only a theory, but we think the black cockies in big numbers wiped out all of the seed stock, because it was obviously getting pollinated, because it was producing cones, but they were always at a green stage before they even got proper seeding, so we're just all predated, so there was that scattered all over the ground. So that probably...
I started working in the gardens in 2021, and I was working on a bushfire recovery program looking at the conservation genetics of a number of rare and threatened species. And Banksia canei was one of the ones on our list. And I found this one quite intriguing because of the distribution across Victoria, being a subalpine species, and of course a Banksia, very beautiful to look at, iconic, charismatic. And yeah, as I started finding out more and speaking to local land managers, Parks Victoria and DECA, I stumbled across the fact that the Burrowa mountain population had gone extinct post-fire. So they hadn't been able to find any seedlings after the fire. And we've kind of got to be a little bit careful when we assess, why is a species going extinct? Is it a natural thing, or is it because of an impact? There is no denying that humans have had such an impact on our natural environment, and therefore we have a responsibility to at least try to fix it. Well, that's my personal view anyway. I guess the interesting thing that happened with the Banksia canei that we didn't expect but we found was that there were distinct kind of regional clusters in the genetics. And so I guess a parallel story started to emerge, because while we were looking at genetic diversity, we also discovered that there was levels of genetic structuring that would indicate to us that if you were going to do any conservation work, you really need to be careful about where you're sourcing your material from, right, what you're introducing where. So I guess knowing the history of the Pine Mountain the Burrowa Mountain population going extinct, my thought went to, okay, well, we've got to find out what group that belonged to, and we could do that by genetically testing the herbarium material. And our results found that it clustered within a group that's called the Snowy Mountains cluster. So they're mostly around Kosciuszko National Park, with the outlier being Burrowa Pine Mountain. If we were looking at doing a restoration project, the ideal scenario would be to do something that's called regional admixture provenancing. So we'd be sourcing material from different populations, and introducing that in our newly created population. And that, I guess, theoretically provides a broad spectrum of genetic diversity, so that adaptation to environmental conditions and disease can happen. And I guess the real clincher in there was that most of the Kosciuszko National Park populations were actually burnt in the Black Summer bushfires that also wiped out Pine Mountain. So out of the 4 locations that we went to, only one was composed of adult individuals. So therefore we only have one potential seed source, and I guess that kind of limits the genetic pool that we would be introducing. We would run the risk of introducing a whole bunch of closely related plants. So the very exciting thing was the discovery of the coral bank population.
Coral Bank is an interesting story. It's a fantastic story in the sense that I happened to be talking at one stage to Simon Fiappy, who's the Mt Burrowa land care facilitator, and he said, I recall Banksias in a spot out near Mount Beauty, and my eyes lit up and I said, really? And we've got potentially we've got definitely 2 species of Banksias in our neck of the woods. Silver Banksia, which is Banksia marginata, which isn't threatened but has definitely declined across the landscape, is another one. I thought, this is going to be a Banksia marginata. It's not going to be what we're after. Simon being Simon, almost the night after or that day went up to this area near Mount Beauty, which is Coral Bank, and he came back to my place that night and had a whole range of these things in his hand and some leaves, and I said, that's definitely interesting, and it's probably the one that we're after. And this is pretty amazing that it'll be a new stand, an up until then, an unknown location for canei in northeast Victoria. And the prospects were pretty salivating because he described there being lots there, and he sort of hinted that there's probably some more in other locations.
I guess the topographic complexity and the fact that these things might be pollinated.
Yeah, that was about the time when I must have got on the phone to Laura.
Yeah, late January 2023, my son's first day of school. So I was at school pickup, my son's first day of school, and 3:30 on the dot, as the school bell rings, my phone rings, and it's Glenn saying, "Hey, we think we've found another population of Banksia canei in the Kiwa Valley. What do we need to do to validate whether this could be a seed source as well?" Yeah, it's been incredible.
Yeah.
That and the Dedic Valley is another one I'd love to do.
Dedic Valley.
Yeah, so it's kind of the other side of... is starting to drop, and there's a seed. Ooh. I don't know if you caught that. That was... couldn't have done that. It just fell out, yeah. They like steep rocky ridges generally, and ridges that are kind of have got a northerly aspect.
They're very specific.
Not always the case.
Yeah, yeah.
But yes, if you can imagine, if you look at a map of this, like this fire block, we're on one spur, but there's another 6 spurs that almost have a very similar aspect, and this is the only spot.
But first things first, we had to confirm that it was the species that highly suspected it was, and I remember getting some photos to Laura and samples to Laura, and so yes, canei, which is fantastic. But as part of the story is it a right fit? Is the coral bank genetics, is it a good fit for the potential for re-establishing the Burrowa pine? So that's where the next part of the story comes about.
Ross Lookout, Bluff Creek. Yep. So this is one of the specimens that I analysed.
So
yeah.
Yes, Laura's been involved in doing the genetic analysis, which you take leaf samples and you go into the DNA, you go into the ancestry history, and not only from a old historical Burrowa pine sense, because by this stage in 2020 there was a zip in Burrowa pine. There's no living plants, but there's historical herbarium samples which could be used.
Loading the leaf material into these. So you see, done one row, and each one has a code that I've written on the back. Yeah. So that's in our catalogue.
It ended up being an appropriate fit that the coral bank genetics were a good fit for being able to contribute to, along with the other Snowy Mountains group, so other species into Kosciuszko, other locations where canei occurred in Kosciuszko.
And yes, it's always this moment of, I'm looking at a plant, it looks like it should be a match, smells like it should be a match, leaves, I've put them in my tubes, but what are the genetics going to tell us?
And it did.
Yes.
Oh, that's awesome.
But there's always a moment of waiting and yeah.
So with the Banksias, we're looking at trying to re-establish the species, which has got some viability in terms of the locations, the distributional spread, but certainly having some good genetics of an appropriate ancestral group, as Laura would say. That means that it's appropriate. These things have got the right mix of genes to go into this new landscape.
And that matched the same genetic and morphological group, which allowed it to be a great location for provenancing seed.
Which one you have?
Have you got batch number 9?
I have 15. No.
Because yes, we said yes, it's the right species. We've confirmed it's canei and it's of the right genetics, but is it viable? Do these things actually hold viable seeds?
Yes.
And what is the seed viability? And so there's a process involved, and our native garden nursery have been pivotal and central to that part of it. But even from a genetics and a Royal Botanic Gardens perspective, they were going to go down the formal line of putting these things through the microscopic analysis to come up with a viability. And the reality is that might be important, and it is, but whether or not our native garden nursery actually can germinate them is the real test.
2 of the trays will go in the hothouse and 2 of the trays will stay outside. So my name's Wendy Smith. I'm the propagation manager at our native garden nursery. It's exciting to be part of that, to help with that project. I think the community loves to be involved in helping preserve something. Our tighter community, our volunteers and the people who come here and work, but also the broader community. If I see those caneis on Pine Mountain when going for a bushwalk in 10 years' time and they're thriving and looking great, I'd want to go up and give them a big hug and a kiss.
And Wendy and the nursery staff and volunteers will tell you the story of how we might get some germination, and you get little cotyledons, the first embryonic leaves above the ground. But that's only part of the process. That's sort of stage 1. Yeah. We've got so many stage 1s, because can you get them through to a 4, 5, 6, 8 leaf stage, and then can you prick them out, and can they survive in the nursery setup without being affected by mildew, and what's the best watering regime? Yeah. And Wendy and the team at our native garden nursery have been really incredibly successful getting them at scale and at bulk. So we were sort of conservative with what we thought we might be able to get without putting too much pressure on the nursery team, thinking, no, they're not really going to be able to easily get 500. But how many seed do we need to extract in order for them to play? Yep. If the viability is low, we need more seed, and can we really collect enough? So it's been a really fantastic exercise in clicking through the cogs to really only get to a stage whereby we think, yes, we've got some seedlings in the hand, and then there's the next step of actually where and how to actually plant them into on site again.
So here we are.
Yeah, and so that ended up being that there's no elevated seed store. So the cones, normally the seed storage basis for this, unlike some wattles which might have a soil seed bank, these things are reliant on having their seed supply in the cones. And as you're saying, Wendy, a fire would normally come through, kill the adult plant, so if it's intense enough, liberate the seeds in a nice potash open environment where there's less competition, and provide a really good opportunity for a seed bed to recruit through with lots of natural seed regeneration. But in this instance, through a decline in the population over the years, numbers going down, and then having no cones, effectively no cones at the time of the fire. So Kelton's done a lot of looking in the areas, and we've not been able to establish any little fellas, so no regeneration. So hence where we are now. Probably 30 here, and about 10 strung out in this section down there. These are really good, I like those.
You can use them today, but they're engraved.
You only brought 3 out, and you can take 3 back. I like these because
eBay.
40 today, 30 on Wednesday.
There's many critically endangered species in that parcel of land.
It's isolated, so Mt Burrowa is up to 1,300 metres, but there are no other mountains close by until you get over to the main range at Kosciuszko and further south out in Pinabara and those alpine regions. So it's been in isolation for so long that they've got their own distinctive features.
Thanks, Scott. You want to make sure. So we're really, that's insufficient at the moment. We want to have, and I sometimes, and this is probably a good point, let's anchor ourselves in, and we'll get John to tell us about making sure we're going to be able to mark our plants accordingly.
Maybe we just put the numbers on each pin before you put them in the ground.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
You'd want to have at least that, so the top of the soil is going to have enough. Maybe Neil, Wendy and Kathy. You've got 3 plants over there, so you need 3 plants, 3 pins, 3 discs. Working out okay? Sure. Yeah.
Good.
There, there's a little bit of upward. I reckon I need a still photo of you with that one, Kelton.
Might have to put some back in.
Oh, it's really pluggy stuff, isn't it?
It certainly is.
Does it really want to go very well, does it?
I give it to at this early
Yeah.
Why don't you go over here somewhere, I suppose. The areas I've burned on Pine Mountain, that hasn't been the only areas that did any good was during the last 2 years. the plan.
Ha!
Volunteers will help to contribute to all of those processes, and honestly we probably get a far better outcome because there's love and ownership in the process. And not to say that commercial planters of trees aren't loving their job and putting 100% into it, but I know that there's 120% going into it when there's a team, and it really is a team. It's a coordinated, collaborative partnership between individuals collectively in a group sense, and concept of having just a broader community awareness and understanding about the plight of our environment and individual threatened species like this one, and having some understanding generates some ownership and interest. And there's a unique thing that we all have, I think, inherent in us, that, you know, nature is pretty special.
We just wouldn't be able to do the work that we do without volunteers. From every step of the way, like our scientific research, we have volunteers who help mount specimens at the National Herbarium of Victoria. Most herbaria around Australia rely on a strong group of volunteers who help in their collections, mounting or maintaining, or putting away specimens within the collection so that scientists can find them. But you know, all of the on-ground work, land care groups, it's all voluntary, and you really do see a lot of the change comes from that on-ground action and by people who care about their local area.
We've got quite a few volunteers who that excites them to be involved in that kind of project, helping out in that way, to see that we're helping, you know, preserve a species and not losing any more species. We really don't want to lose any more, and so if they can be a part of helping in any way, I think that's a good, beneficial, all-round community thing. I think it's a really soul-building activity. Yeah,
I love that component of bringing in a whole lot of people together, and we end up having a unified mission, if you like. We have an agreed means of, an agreed aim, and to achieve that's the ultimate goal. And I've got this is a bit of a summation that because we've got so much volunteer support, that we're going to make this work.
I can hear the song, the sounds of joy, rising with the dawn. Now there is light inside my heart, burning still, and leave my eyes when love was leading me to the other side. And the road filled with pain, but I would never change a thing. These trials brought me awakening.
I'm really bullish about this particular species in this landscape. I've dealt with and managed or helped contribute to the conservation of a lot of species, and I think that's a bit of a blueprint for if we can get a bulk of numbers in this landscape back in Nova Pine. I can see us being successful. It sort of stirs the passion in all of us who are involved in conservation, that we can have a tiny part to contribute to something that's bigger than us, and having that feeling that we're somehow contributing to a little bit of wild, still in a pretty modified and human influenced landscape. And it's sort of nice to think that we might be able to put back, or at least keep, the pieces of the puzzle going for individual species and parts of the landscape.